Welcome to Pivot Fast, building immersive platforms for events. My name is Tyler Gates. I'm the host of Everything VR and AR. It is a global podcast put on behalf of the VR and AR Association. I'm also joined here today by my friend and colleague, Donnie Nufus, who is the Senior Vice President of Virtual Events and Platforms for Brightline Interactive. I also own Brightline Interactive, so Donnie and I get to work together on a day-to-day basis. I asked Donnie to join me on this webinar because Donnie comes with about 20 years of experience in the virtual events, live streaming, and immersive platform space. And he's been in it for longer than I've been in this space, but specifically in audio streaming and then into live streaming, and then now into building out virtual style events from live events. We also are joined here by some of our really good friends, and we'll get into introducing them here in a second. But I really wanted to also just sort of explain at a high level why we're here. Why did we start Pivot Fast? We started it very quickly. We about 4 or 5 days ago, we decided that we were getting so much on my company side of things, on the Brightline side of things, we were getting so much request for people wanting to pivot into virtual events, starting from live events, but really not knowing how to do that and not really knowing where to start and which platform is the best fit for their needs. And so we started to have these internal conversations where we were helping our internal staff and our other partners and friends and colleagues understand how to talk about this industry. And then we started to realize, okay, well, if we can share that information with more people, then we think we can have more impact. And that led us to where we are now. And so we decided, because of my involvement with the VRARA Association, I reached out to my friends, Josh Luchtmeyer and Robert Howell at Resource Department. And for those of you who don't know, Resource Department is a global resource for brands and agencies. These guys started they were execs at brands and agencies in the previous Resource Department. And then they started this really to help brands and agencies connect with all different types of event producers and technologists and creatives inside the space so that they can achieve the best event possible. And so we reached out to those guys and said, listen, we want to bring this message to as many people as we can. And so they said, yes, we love the idea of that. Let's take that to all of our members as well. And so Pivot Fast was born. So again, we're at Pivot Fast, building immersive platforms for events. And our guests, and let me get to our guests. These are some of these folks we've known for a long time. Some we've just met just in the last year, but they're all esteemed guests in their individual fields. We have Joanna Popper, who's the global head of location-based entertainment at HP. Now, Joanna, we just had Joanna on the Everything VR and AR podcast a couple of weeks ago. So if you like hearing what you hear here, and I know you will, you got to listen to our conversation. We went into a little bit more depth specifically around what HP is doing during coronavirus. And then we have Ron Martin, who's the creative and technical director of business development at Unity Technologies. And if you don't know who Unity is, then you should, because Unity is the development tool. A lot of people refer to it as a game engine, but we really refer to it as a creation engine, because Unity is what allows us to bring content to life in the virtual space. And that's not just graphic assets. That's things like building lighting engines and physics engines and making things be really believable and real. And that's all provided by Unity Technologies. And then we have Amy Scarfone. Amy is also a vet of the VR AR Association podcast. We got to interview Amy actually at Microsoft Ignite last year in Florida. Amy is the principal design manager at Microsoft. And specifically, she works and oversees the program around SharePoint Spaces, which we'll get into in the discussion portion. And then last but not least, we have Vinay Narayan. And Vinay is the VP of Platform Strategy and Developer Community at HTC Vive. And HTC, again, for those of you who may not know, HTC Vive makes incredible hardware and software, but specifically head-mounted displays so that people can consume immersive technology for both virtual and augmented reality. So again, Joanna, Ron, Amy, Vinay, we're going to get to them in a few minutes here. First, Donnie and I are going to take you through kind of a level setting, discussion around how should you think about taking your event virtual? How should you go from, I have a live event and it's supposed to go off in Q4, or it is going to launch in July over the summer. And now I have to figure out how to pivot that entire strategy towards a virtual strategy. And that isn't just about picking up that live event and plopping it into some virtual space. That is an entirely new way of thinking about how to pivot. And so we say, why pivot fast? Well, this is, we don't have to spend too much time here, because we all are going through this right now. Maybe your business is booming because of the requests coming out of coronavirus. But if you're like most of us, you're challenged at some level because you can't gather. You can't meet for the actual events that you're producing or putting on or hosting or sponsoring or involved in some capacity. But not only that, you can't meet to help produce those things. And so why pivot fast? Well, the answer is because we have to. So how we're going to cover that, we're going to step through three things. The first thing is, where are we right now? So answering that question, where are you right now? This might sound really, really obvious, but you have to know where you are in order to know where to go. And so it's really important to admit and to be able to say, okay, maybe your case is we have a campaign that culminates to the launch of a major feature-length film that comes out in July. And we have 7 activation locations around the country where we were going to do an event. And then we're going to do our main activation in LA. And then we had a virtual and digital campaign that was going to supplement all of that physical effort. And that is where you are right now. And now all of a sudden, everything is canceled. And so now you have to figure out how to pivot fast into, now how do we still deliver the right amount of meaningful content to our consumers? And I've heard a lot of people say this, we have sports and entertainment, things like that have shut down momentarily, but storytelling is not dead. And so we have to continue telling those stories, but tell those stories in meaningful ways by using immersive technology. So figuring out where you are right now. Then where can we go? And this is a really obvious question, but where can we go from here? And this is the question that we aim to spend the most amount of time answering the next couple of slides, because where you can go is vast. And a lot of times what happens is that people will go from live events to saying, okay, we want to go virtual, and they'll just jump 1,000 miles ahead, and they'll go to the full scale, full bore, fully photorealistic room scale virtual reality. And it just isn't required. And so there's a lot of middle ground in between that's really, really meaningful. And then the last question is, how do we get there? And this, again, very obvious question, but how we actually get there is figuring out where we are right now, and then figuring out where we can go. And then once we figured out where we can go, it's a little bit of massaging and sort of custom work that goes on to making sure that those platforms that you've selected, they make the most amount of sense for you. They're branded in the right way. They are communicating in the right way. You're using the right form of communication. And so to take us through how we step customers through that, I'm going to let Donnie take over. We're going to start with on-demand content versus live content. And the reason why we're starting here is because this is exactly where we start. When somebody calls us up on the phone and Donnie picks up and is answering, is listening to the customer saying, okay, we have this live event. It's not happening anymore. We can't just cancel it because we still need to garner some of the media attention, some of the viewership. And then we actually think that by doing this virtually, we can actually open up new lines of communication. And so the first thing that we ask them is, do you want to deliver the content on demand at the user's leisure, or do you need to deliver this content live? Donnie?
Yeah, so thank you, Tyler, and thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate your time today. So yeah, at the core of this is really based upon the behavior that we have today when it comes to consuming content. And, when I started in the industry 20 years ago, we didn't have things like Netflix and Amazon Prime or Hulu. And now today, I can't imagine life without that. And really, that's because those types of platforms are on-demand platforms. And those platforms, when we talk about on-demand, we talk about the ability to time shift, the ability to play something when I want to play it, to fast forward it, to pause it, to rewind it and review it. And that's the majority of the behavior that we have when it comes to consuming content. There are, they used to call it must-see TV. There are very few things these days that demand us to watch it live. Most of what we do is on demand. So when you're thinking about virtualizing an event, on-demand is actually an incredibly powerful tool because the majority of the content that you need to deliver to your members, your customers, whoever it may be, most times it can be done on demand. And you will see this. You'll see this where people will go to watch some courses or watch some content when they have free time, especially in the medical industry. Doctors will actually, they're so busy during the day that when they have a free moment, they're big users of iPads and they'll watch content to educate themselves on demand. Live, again, I said must-see TV. So live, the way to think about live is when you have to deliver information that is critical. So when there is information that the government is delivering to our healthcare professionals, that information will lead to saving people's lives, that is when live isn't the appropriate tool. Now, on the flip side of a different use case, think about the Super Bowl. Like, that is something that a lot of people tune in to watch because they want to know the score. They want to know what's going to happen with that event. And that's when live is appropriate. Keynote sessions in the events industry are typically the type of things that you will stream live because there's somebody there that people all know, that they want to hear that message and they want to hear that in real time. The common mistake that's made in virtualizing your events is that when people contact us, they think because the event they did was live, that everything has to be live. And the truth of the matter is that's just not the case. There are certain speakers or there's certain information that might garner it being live, or there might be a health organization that needs to convey something to its members that, again, saving lives, keeping people safe. That's where live is really appropriate. But the majority of the content, the breakout rooms, all the education sessions, those are for smaller audiences, more niche audiences, and that's where on-demand's appropriate.
And Donnie, this too is, again, another reason why we call this out at the beginning is we're not talking about, just to clarify for our viewers and listeners, we're not talking about on-demand and live. We're not talking about, they're not methodologies. They're not platform types. They are ways it is the digestion of it's the consumption of the content. And so you can have on-demand and live across all of these different types of platforms that we're about to step into. And the reason why we ask this question here is in those of you who are event producers or are in charge of the budgets to put on these style events, this is a really meaningful point here because there's a really big budget shift in doing content on demand versus doing all the content live. And there's a lot more to that story in terms of why. But this is why we put this here, because if you're about to host an event or put on an event and you want to take it virtual and you do not have to have the content be live, don't, because it's not required. You really can have it be simulated live. You can have it be on demand in a way that consumers, that your audience is able to ingest that information at their own leisure. And so we talk about on demand and live, but now we're going to step into actual platform types. And there are two main categories of platform types. That's virtual event platforms and then immersive platforms, which we're going to get into second. So virtual event platforms, this is really more of an understanding of the state of the industry right now. And there are two main types of virtual event platforms.
Yeah. So when it comes to virtual event platforms, these are things that have been around, for 10, 15 years. Honestly, since the internet was widely adopted. And really, this has to do, again, with the type of content. So a common platform is a learning management system, or people call it an LMS, right? And really, there are a lot of these platforms that are out there that they don't call themselves LMSs, but they are. And what I mean by learning management system is this is on-demand content, a lot of on-demand content that you are communicating to an audience that needs to learn this information. And then after they watch the content, the way you find out whether they learn is you verify it. Now, you could say YouTube could be a learning management system in the sense that you have a comment section and people watch the video and then they give their feedback on what they just watched, which shows that they actually did pay attention. All the way to full out learning management systems used for doctors, used for universities, where you actually have them go through staged content and there's an assessment where people answer questions like you would as if you were taking a test in school, and then there's a pass or a fail type of grade that's given to that. This is really widely adopted, especially in this time right now. If you think about it, where people are working in the hospitality industry, right, or working in the grocery industry, where there are new standards that are coming out constantly that they have to follow after COVID-19, as far as, using desanitation, cleaning methods, all those type of things that they need to learn when they're not working, so that when they come to work, they know these new methodologies. This is where this system is really powerful. Then the virtual conferences and meetings platforms. This is basically a culmination of several technologies together. So right now, Tyler and I are on Zoom. We are talking to each other on Zoom because Zoom is really meant for a small group to collaborate with each other and have an equal voice to share and see each other and all that. That's really what that tool is for, right? So small group collaborative. But you're a large audience. If we let all of you onto this Zoom, nobody could get in a word edgewise. We'd all be talking over each other. So what we're doing is we're using YouTube Live and we're using Facebook Live to do a one-to-many, a distribution to a larger audience that we're broadcasting out. It's a webcasting tool, right? So when you look at these virtual conference and meetings platforms, all these are a culmination of all of these tools: learning management systems, webinar technology, and webcasting technology. And based upon what type of content it is and which group you're interacting with and who's speaking, who the content is, that dictates which tool is used in these platforms. And these platforms, again, have been around for a while. There's an Expo, On24, 6Connects. These are all platforms that kind of bring these tools into a seamless experience for the virtual attendees.
And what we're seeing here too is we're seeing these two types of virtual event platforms that have traditionally not really been the focal point for, I would say, the vast majority of this listening and viewing audience. Is it because these learning management systems specifically? I mean, we've, on the Brightline Interactive side, we do work obviously on the commercial brand side, where we do a lot of these sort of virtual and augmented reality systems and events. But then at the same time, also on the government side, where we do a lot of training, where learning management systems are standard. That's what is being used on an ongoing basis every day. This is not new news. This is an existing system. But this system now has a lot of power inside the scenario that we're currently in, because of what, Donnie, what you're saying. I mean, you have this ability to now have a virtual tool that you can use to educate, communicate, and assess, and make sure that people understand exactly what you need them to understand based on what you're communicating. And so this could be company-wide information for a global entity. This could be, like Donnie was talking about, new regulations and rules that are put into place because of COVID-19, that you have to stand up new practices inside a global entity. These are ways to use learning management systems and functions they weren't used before, but they're now incredibly relevant because of what's going on. And learning management systems have typically, most people know these systems to be relatively sterile. Maybe they're missing some of the sort of sexy sort of flash and glitz and glam that some of the other sort of immersive technology experiences have. But that is not intrinsically true of a learning management system. We can make learning management systems be really, really beautiful. But then you have virtual conferences and meetings where those have been, again, also sort of on the periphery, because they sort of support a live event. But now it is the main focus. And now we're saying, move forward with a virtual first mentality. So think, how can we accomplish our goal with virtual first thinking versus thinking first about the live interactive experience? And so we've talked about virtual event platforms. This is kind of what exists now. And the easiest way to think about these platforms is the vast majority of these exist as basically web or desktop tools. So you're going to access this content. Your consumer, the fan attending your event, they're going to come to this content by going on their computer, or their mobile device. Then we're going to step into immersive platforms, because this tends to be where people go from, like I was saying before, they go from, we have this live event, and now we need to take this live event virtually. So people just assume that this means we're all going to put on head-mounted displays and be in virtual reality. And that just isn't the case. And we know that because we know that the vast majority of the user population does not have a head-mounted display, and so they're not going to access the content that way. But using this style content can be exponentially meaningful, exponentially more meaningful than communicating two-dimensionally. Because with virtual reality, and this is true in events, collaboration, and training, with virtual reality, what's happening is that you're delivering to the consumer what's called embodied cognition. And so now the consumer, rather than being a bystander watching the content on the screen, they're now a participant, they're now involved, and they're inside that environment. So you have this capacity to be in it, to be among it, and to have your presence inside there be meaningful to the actual space. And so we've broken this down into 3 categories. Now, there are many more categories here, but we've tried to simplify this down for this industry. And so we have VR and AR for events, for collaboration, and for training. Events, very specific. We want to bring people around a common dinner table. Maybe it's the launch of something. We want to show a movie. We want to show an object. We want to release a product. We want to release a clothing style, whatever the case is. That's an event. And so we want to gather people together inside a virtual reality environment to do that. Now, this can be done in networked collaborative ways, but then it can also be done in standalone one-to-one experiences in virtual and augmented reality. Now, specifically, just in terms of events and collaboration together, collaboration, we're talking about where this is an internal function typically, or you're planning an event, or you're building a product, or you're building something virtually. It doesn't matter. You want that sensation of when I'm in a room and I can see everyone's faces and I can understand where they're talking, I can understand the direction from which they're speaking, and I know kind of their facial features, and I can understand how they're interacting with me. And because of that, our time when we're communicating is a lot more meaningful, especially if we're involved, if we're doing anything, if we're trying to create something in that time. And so in virtual and augmented reality collaboration platforms, you can have that. You're represented as an avatar. So I am aware of myself and I'm aware of other people inside the virtual reality environment. We can draw things and stand and look at things that are being drawn in the virtual space. You can move yourself around in that space so that you can see everything from the originator's perspective. And so there are really sort of meaningful ways to use immersive platforms for sort of deeper connections, more meaningful. We're able to generate information, sort of comprehension a lot faster because naturally you're involved in the scene. And so training is also obviously on the sort of government military side and enterprise side. There's a lot that can be done with virtual reality, is ongoing right now for virtual reality, augmented reality with training. But specifically when it comes to events, we're talking about more the logistic tactical side of producing and creating. And so how do you train people? How do you give them the information that they need? How do you take them through the event site if they've never been there and they can't go there? How do you do that? Well, we use virtual reality to do that. And so we use virtual reality in the function of training to do that. So we have covered a lot here. We've gone through a lot of different, we've in about 15 minutes, we've raced through a lot of information. So I just want to recap that really quickly before we get into discussion. So in summary, what we're saying is you have to understand where you are. What are you doing right now and what has happened? You've canceled your event. You're involved in a production company who's canceled a bunch of events or whatever the case is. And then you have to figure out, okay, where can we go from here? Which platform makes the most sense? Do we want to go on demand? Do we need to be everything? Does everything have to be live, or can we make some of this be simulated live, or can it be on demand? And then do we need to have networking in this experience? Do we need to be present with other people inside this virtual environment, or does that not really matter? And then we covered virtual event platforms, so desktop-based platforms and the different styles of those. And then we covered immersive platforms, what you can do in virtual and augmented reality. And now that we've level set, now we want to do the fun part, which is actually bringing in our friends. Because like I say this often, people on my team know if I'm the smartest person in the room, there's a problem. So I got to bring in people who are a lot smarter than me and are capable of having meaningful conversation around this. And so to do that, we're going to bring in our featured guests. And while we do that, while they're coming online, I am going to introduce them again. And so with us, we have at in the left side of the screen there, we have Joanna Popper. Joanna is the global head of virtual reality for location-based entertainment at HP. And like I said, Joanna, we have been on the podcast together, and so we're really looking forward to hear from you. We also have with us Ron Martin. Ron is the creative and technical director of business development at Unity Technologies. We also have Amy Scarfone, who is principal design manager at Microsoft. And then Vinay Narayan, who is the VP of Platform Strategy and Developer Community at HTC Vive. Welcome, friends.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Awesome.
It's nice to be here.
Well, let's start out, guys, because we have had multiple conversations. I've had a bunch of conversations with a bunch of you individually. We've talked all together several times. We've been having this conversation around what, first of all, we know because of what's going on right now that we don't really have to answer to the question around the value proposition for virtual. I mean, it's very obvious. What is that value prop for virtual? Well, we basically need it in order for us to maintain life, in order for us to maintain business, keep things moving. We need virtual because we need to be able to communicate in a capacity where we can't all be together. And so that's sort of the dinner table that we're all gathered around here, and you all have very unique and individual perspectives. And so would like to get into that. So maybe, Joanna, if we could just start from you, and I'll ask the same question to all four of you, but really the question is what are you doing specifically, and then what is your company doing in almost direct response to COVID-19 and what's going on with coronavirus, not just nationwide, but around the world. So what are you guys doing in response? Joanna?
We have a ton of different initiatives and activities that are happening in response, both at the larger HP level and as well as specifically in the virtual reality area. So I'll start with the larger across HP. So first, of course, we're donating money, donating supplies, helping out with hospitals and all of that big, good work that the corporation is doing. But then we're also putting our technology to work. So we're using our 3D printing technology and partner network to create 3D printed parts that are being used for healthcare workers. And so we have a place that hospitals can sign up, and we've already created and already sent out a ton of face masks and for parts for respirators and ventilators and doorknob covers and wrist covers. So it's really some great work, for the heroes out there that are front lines on the healthcare workers and people in hospitals. So that is a really great initiative that I'm super proud of. That people in the Model Lab have been working day and night to make that happen, and then the whole partner network has been jumping into place to print those out. So that's one was really fantastic. Another big issue we're seeing, of course, is students and educators went from going to school every day and working in a traditional model to all of a sudden working or learning from home and teaching from home and being educated at home. And not everybody has the systems in place. I think something like 30% of students in the U.S. U.S. markets don't have their own laptops and computers to access. And so we have an initiative called HP Refresh, which is a software solution to help prep old computers be able to be used as for remote learning right now. So if you're interested in that, go online and look up hp.com/HP Refresh. And you can actually, if you have an old computer that you want to donate, you can donate it as well, and we'll help get it set up, whether it's an HP computer or not HP computer. That software is available to you. So that's, there's on the healthcare side, there's on the education side. And then for workers, a lot of people have really super high performance, powerful computers at work that are doing, heavy pipeline, heavy workflows, but they're not able to access those computers now. So we have a product called Z Central that is allowing people to remote into their computers, and we have a 90-day free trial of that product right now. So there's a whole bunch of different initiatives, as I said, happening at a corporate level to help people in healthcare, to help people in education, and to help people in the workforce deal with these the new times that we're in, and to help out the heroes that are out there doing the great work in all of those verticals. Now on the virtual reality side, or the immersive computing side, we that work in the industry have known for a while that virtual reality and immersive computing is one of the best ways to be trained in anything around spatial computing or 3D modeling, to do product design, to reviews, design and reviews, to do architecture, engineering, construction, design and review. and on the training or education side to really retain information in a better way. So a lot of companies reach out to us internally and even both externally, of course, as well, and then internally. We're seeing our own industrial design teams asking us how can they do those design reviews that are usually super confidential behind locked doors. No one can bring in a phone. How can they continue to do those same reviews that maybe be using virtual reality and to have that similar feeling of looking at the quality and being able to expedite the process. So we're seeing that. We're seeing educators reach out to us about how do they use virtual reality for some of those courses like biology or physics or chemistry, where spatial computing makes a lot of sense. And then we're working with companies on the event side. And then internally, we have moved a lot of our own meetings. Some of them in the past were in virtual reality already. We've moved a high percentage virtual reality, and then we're even doing our fun like hangouts in virtual reality. So some of the in playing basketball or dodgeball, or because in the past people would go to lunch or they would meet up in the hallway or they'd see each other and they'd have the water cooler moments, but those don't exist right now. And so in some cases that makes sense on Zoom or a platform like we're on right now, and in other cases VR is certainly the best answer. And so we're having a lot of our internal teams as well as clients use our HP virtual reality technology, the Reverb, the backpack, to bring this all into action.
Awesome. Joanna, a lot going on there. That's awesome.
I love it. And I know I dropped a lot of different websites and
different
programs. But if anyone is interested, I post most of it on my LinkedIn or on my Twitter. But you can find the links there, or reach out directly to me. Always happy to field questions and help out in this time. And it's definitely it's a really, really hard time for so many people around the world for so many reasons. But we're very we especially are working hard to help the healthcare workers, as I said, and the educators, the frontline workers, groceries, and shout out to everybody.
Yeah.
All the essential workers. We're keeping the world going these days. We have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for you all.
Definitely. Yes. And Ron, before we get to you, I do want to say this because Joanna mentioned this, but we are, if you have questions, if you're watching and listening to this, you have questions, and we definitely want to try to answer as many of them as possible. So I actually have them pulled up, and I've got questions already from viewers, and we're going to try to get to those after we get through the introductions here. But if we don't answer your question here, what we're going to do is we're going to answer all of the questions that come in. We'll compile them all together in the way that you receive the invite for this. You probably got an email, somebody invited you in some capacity. We're going to send out another email with the recorded version of this, also with all of the questions answered, so you can see everyone else's questions as well. And then we'll also try to put in there documentation around the presentation that we delivered, which is really just the helpful parts of like how to think about the different types of events and the different type of platforms that are out there, as well as just some contact information as well. And so please, we are recording this. We are going to push this back out. If you did not, if somebody that is not able to make it, or you have to jump early or whatever the case is, we will have this recorded and pushed back out. And please send in your questions. Ron, tell us a little bit about Unity.
Great. So Unity is a platform for developing, as you mentioned before, any interactive or immersive environments and prototyping a lot of different ideas. Ultimately, coming from a game engine background, that concept of play and the idea of exploring ideas virtually became very natural to Unity. And then once the platform started to mature, we saw a lot of different use cases come through. So when COVID-19 kicked in, we really decided as a company to dedicate as much of the time and effort as we could to helping the developers and creators accelerate or develop programs that could help, in their different situations. So one of the first things that came to mind was granting people access to the Unity Learn premium program that we usually charge for on the Unity website. And this is guided education and the ability for the next 90 days to give people the opportunity to learn and develop with Unity. As well, we're thinking about a lot of the educators and kids at home and how we could help them achieve the goals that, and expand their understanding of both immersive technologies and also that concept of developing for possibly new inroads into other occupations. So we have a program called Create with Code Live, which again is a foundational course for Unity, primarily pointed at educators and younger developers. And that's a free 35-hour course that we have there as well.
Yeah, and I love, Ron, just when you say that you're offering that for free right now, which is incredible. It's sort of, it's kind of like if you're sitting at home and you're trying to figure out what can I do right now, and what would be a good career trajectory for me moving forward. If that's you, then you should take advantage of what Ron just said. Because you should get in and start figuring out how to program and design and create inside Unity, because it is really, people oftentimes, I say this on the podcast often, that people understand a new thing through the lens of an old thing. And so when people think about Unity or think about like game engine, they think about the thing that it's most commonly used for, which is video games. But what we can do with Unity goes far beyond video games, far beyond that. And what you can create, what you can bring to life, what you can simulate, what you can teach is significant. And so when somebody says that they're offering Unity for free, to learn how to use Unity for free, I would pay attention to that message, and I'd take Ron up on that offer. All right, Thanks, Ron. Vinay, if you could you tell us a little bit about what's going on at HTC Vive?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. So, with HTC Vive, we originally got into VR really to help the community. So when COVID-19 really impacted so many, we really doubled down our efforts to do what we do best, which is really community outreach about how to use the technology for a lot of use. And fortunately for us too, we also have a big sense of responsibility. We're probably the number one, if not definitely the top VR headset in the enterprise space. So many companies right now are using our products and services to really help to collaborate, to design, to do a lot of different activities and collaborations with groups that are all over the world. So while this was going on, we also wanted to make sure that we were also sharing best practices. Because one of the things we understood is oftentimes when your first experience, if it's a bad experience, you walk away with already an opinion that can actually be detrimental to adoption of platforms. So when all this stuff was going on, we actually did a virtual conference based out of China that was normally our ecosystem conference that we went completely virtual. And with that conference, we actually opened up the doors to do a lot of really amazing things. One, to be able to collaborate and actually meet with other folks in the industry. The other thing too is having these events that actually have so much information. We realize time zone and travel, all these things can be a challenge. So of course, no one's traveling at the moment, but how do we bring those events to the aspects of those events to the community? So we also had recorded events there as well. So you could actually go and step in to what would normally be a live presentation and still interact. If you were going to a recorded session and you saw another avatar or another person in that space, you could still actually interact with that person as well. So it gave a really good feel and a good sense for how can you really do a robust, compelling, engaging event in truly an immersive VR space. But also too, I think we've been also working really hard with a lot of our partners. In the VR space, there's about 40 different collaboration type of software. So we've been also helping those tools about those partners with best practices. In fact, we've also done our collaboration tool called Vive Sync. And Vive Sync is really a tool that is for collaboration, anywhere from 2 to 30 people. So more of that smaller group collaboration, but also to bring those tools for non-VR use. So you can use these tools for 2D experiences as well as 3D. But when you're doing VR for just personal use, for engagement, for fun, things like what your avatar looks like doesn't really matter. So you can easily pick something, it's fun. But when you're doing it for a more professional setting, you also want to identify with your avatar, and you also want others to identify with yours. So some of the tools that we have with Vive Sync is the ability to create your avatar just using your camera phone, and you can actually get a really lifelike or very accurate description of who you are as a person in avatar form. You can customize it as you choose, but that process is also really easy. And the ability to share a virtual environment with somebody else that may not have a VR headset is also easy as well. I mean, we do that through a QR code. In addition to a lot of the services and tools that we've been providing, we continue to work with a lot of the agencies that we've been supporting. Namely, in this particular case, the FDA. The FDA is also very keen on accelerating XR use case in the healthcare industry. And right as this was starting, the FDA actually had a pretty big summit around what are best practices. And we're working really tirelessly with the FDA to really help those practitioners, those doctors, those healthcare administrators to navigate the landscape of how to do best practices in VR. And some of these challenges are very real and very immediate, because we know that, especially when it comes to having to do isolation or minimize and mitigate risk, the virtual environment is really the safest way to do that, but it also helps to accelerate learning. There's a lot of new procedures and tools that are changing on a weekly, if not daily basis. How do you get that information out there? And how do you make sure that that's followed properly? And so we've been working with the FDA and other groups as well to help with these tools. And of course, VR kind of being one of the best tools for that medium. And lastly, too, we recognize that when it comes to events and different engagements, that we're really looking at an ecosystem of tools. So it can be web-based tools like a Zoom, it can be VR-based tools. But as we look at these various tool stacks, virtual meetings and collaborations are great if you're sharing agendas, if you're trying to collaborate. But one piece that's always really missing is that level of engagement. And engagement is really your personal connection to the event, to the conversation, and really kind of building that tie-in, so that way you do get that personal aspect, the water cooler conversation that you have afterwards, those various interactions that are also just as important as the content that's being shared in these spaces. So we continue to work with our partners. We're also doing a lot more virtual events, showcasing how to use these tools, how to really implement these best practices. And of course, we share all of that at vive.com as well as on our blogs as well.
It's incredible. Again, incredible, Vinay. I mean, and I'll say, I mean, we as a company, we have been using the HTC products, and you talked about, being largest in the enterprise side and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's in terms of when you don't often think about the delivery mechanism. You really sort of users tend to focus on the content. They tend to focus on what they're doing. But really, I mean, how they get that content is this delivery mechanism. And the delivery mechanism in this case is a head-mounted display. And so what you guys are doing around delivering content to users is incredible. And all, I mean, you just step through, the stuff. I'm sure that's just like what's on the top of your, what's top of mind right now. And I know that there's a lot of other stuff that's going on as well. Amy, get us into a little peek into Microsoft, and then specifically SharePoint Spaces.
Yeah, so obviously across Microsoft right now, we're prioritizing and optimizing all of our sharing and communications platforms for the COVID situation. So Spaces, if you're not familiar with Spaces, it is a web-based on-demand platform for enterprise and education that works within your Microsoft SharePoint tenant. And basically, we make it just as easy to create a virtual environment as it would be to create, for example, a PowerPoint slide. So it's super easy for people to go in and federate both 2 and 3D content in a way that simulates a virtual environment. What this is great for right now is, so you can imagine like schools are not happening, and the kinds of experiences where students would pin up content or have models. We're working with a school system, for example, that the kids are making models right now in Minecraft, and then they're sharing them in SharePoint Spaces. And with the ability to have all of these models and 2D content like sketches for the models, you can tell some really great stories. So our whole Spaces team of designers, engineers, and program managers right now, we have been focused on shifting our backlogs to rapidly pivot to work on some of these features that are unlocking our customers as we see growth in certain areas and not others. So because Spaces is web-based, we work on your computer, but we also work with a headset. And as Tyler mentioned earlier, not everyone has a headset right now, and they can be pretty hard to get. But with Spaces, we'll work in your browser, and you can create something that is absolutely beautiful without needing to go into a VR headset. As I mentioned, we've been having to pivot our backlogs a little bit. So for example, one scenario that's kind of dried up is our kiosk scenario, where we were planning to use Spaces in, like, for example, conference kiosks. Well, nobody wants to put a headset on and share it with somebody else right now. It's probably not the best thing to do. So while that scenario is dried up, there's a huge uptick in people that want to be able to experience this content in 2D. And fortunately, we have already figured out that problem by being a web-based product. So yeah, a lot going on.
Yeah, and I would say in terms of practicality for the masses, I would say what you're talking about with Spaces is specifically critical because it's easy. I mean, that's the point. You guys know this more than anyone, as leading this whole effort. It takes a lot of work to make it easy. And so getting it down to the simplified fashion where, like you said, think about creating PowerPoint. Like, it can be that easy to be able to create collaboration tools where you can collaborate with people across the globe. So you do not have to be a programmer. You do not have to be a specialist in order to realize the value of immersive technology, whether it's head-mounted display based or on the computer. So thank you everyone for going through all of that. That's a lot of information. And again, we just want to reiterate, we're going to compile all this information together and share this back out both in written form as well as in this recorded version of this live webinar. But let's take the next few minutes to go into a little bit now specifically into virtual events. You guys, all four of you, spoke about different ways that you're either doing that. I know HTC, you guys did it you did your developer conference fully in virtual reality, which is insane. And, they're across the board, you guys are doing this already sort of inherently because it isn't really sort of a response to COVID-19. This is just who you are as companies. But now because you're in that space, because COVID-19 is going on, you're well positioned to sort of reach out to the community and to provide a lot of resources. And so we've talked about some of those individual resources, but let's pull back to sort of the 50,000 foot view. What do you guys see what is happening right now at events, and how are your technologies or technologies like yours being leveraged to deliver on the promise to the fan of get me closer to the content? Get me as close as I want to be. Give me the experience because I'm either paying for that or I'm paying for that in my viewership. And so, give me as much as I can get. And what would be your response? Like, what is the way for them to do that?
We hosted a webinar, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, where we invited 11 different companies to come and talk about their collaborative platform or meeting platform. And the reason we did that was because we've been getting questions from all of our clients and from internal and really just everywhere around the world. Well, what is the best way that I now move my event to a virtual platform? Or what is the best way that I take this workflow process that I used to do live together in a room for product design and move it to a virtual platform? What is the best way that I can have the most engaging interaction around education? So we had 11 platforms come. We co-hosted it. I co-hosted it with Bob Fine from VR Voice, and we had 11 platforms from the U.S., from France, from Lithuania, from Denmark, from India, coming around the world, and all of the platforms covered everything from meeting, collaboration platform to architecture, engineering, construction to engineering, specifically for medical education to broader education. To answer the question of how do I take this activity make it, make it work for me in this current virtual environment. And what, we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but in many cases, whether or not we're homebound and staying safe at home or sheltering in place, virtual reality in many cases or immersive computing makes sense for those workflows already, in terms of increasing retention for enterprise training, in terms of decreasing the time to go through a product design or architecture, engineering design, or in HP, actually, we have training for our 3D printing technicians done in virtual reality as a proof of concept, and they were able to take the training for those technicians down from 7 days to 4 days, and greatly reduce the cost. And so that was something that we were already doing, but we're now seeing a lot of attention coming and people asking, how do we do this? So we hosted that webinar. We've been providing tools to our entire sales force on what is the best technology to use to take these actions, and then also what are the best partners on the software side to use to take the action, and arming our whole army of salespeople and partners around the world to help guide them through this time, to help them come up with the best answers for right now and beyond.
Yeah, and we actually got this question in. We're taking questions, and if you see me looking down, it's because I'm.
I also want to say one more thing about that one. We're actually going to host another webinar with another crop of those platforms. So if you missed it, you can watch the previous one, and then there'll be another one April 30th.
Cool. Yeah, and we're taking questions in from both Facebook and YouTube, and so we just got this question is what do you do essentially? What's a recommendation when you have a large event that's centered around, let's say, in this case, it's a film release, where it centers around something that is on screen? What is the kind of the response to that? Our response, the easiest response to that is that the question is, can you still have an event around that? And the answer is yes. I mean, the beautiful part about the fact that you're releasing something that is on screen is that information is two-dimensional. And so we can then relay that two-dimensional information inside a plethora of virtual environments in really, really meaningful ways. And I think maybe Ron, if you want to take a crack at this one, just in terms of because it's Unity that we would do that in. We would use Unity, whether we were on the web or in a head-mounted display or on mobile phones. We'd use Unity to actually accomplish that.
Well, Unity is such an extensible platform in that regard. We support 20 plus different platforms on, and being able to create content seamlessly from, the developer, the idea, conceptualize, and then push it out to the device. And you can do that all with the vanilla right out of the box. So when we look at companies that have created these successful platforms for VR, Rec Room, VR Chat, this really great opportunity for people to have virtual launches inside of that space. Now, some of these different platforms that have been developed are add-ons to other pieces of software. And if we specifically talk to one which is experiencing great success now, is a company called spaces.com. And Brad Herman, who's the CTO and the main developer of his new VR API that he built on top of Zoom, actually works with any of the different chat software, allows you to do a one-way presentation between VR as a presenter to many people in spread out over, what great distances and different applications. So his philosophy around creating this app was really, there was no way for them to create presentations outside of Zoom without sharing screens, losing that dynamic connectivity between the audience and the presenter. So they took a weekend and banged out a really great application, which enabled Zoom, firstly, to have this presenter. And it's a real testament to the ability for Unity to extend its use case, and working inside of VR was really surprising to me. Like, it came across, and Brad hosted the meeting, introducing me to his application in that regard, and right away I was sold. It was amazing. The connectivity and the use case there was amazing.
Yeah, and that right there, you could solve this question. You could solve that with that technology, which is why I wanted you to answer that. I mean, and I'll say anecdotally, we're using it on a regular basis. We talked about this earlier, Ron, but we use it internally on our team because we have some users at home who have head-mounted displays, and if we want to do a team meeting in virtual reality, it's just more meaningful. It's easier to accomplish the meeting in honestly in a shorter time frame because we're present with one another. And so we can do that in virtual reality. But then what Ron is talking about, this allows us to do is pull in Zoom feeds. So then we can be inside, I can be in virtual reality and I see a screen with all the Brady Bunch tiles with everyone on there, all their videos. And so I can see them, but then I can also see people who are present in VR because they're represented as avatars. And so it's an incredibly collaborative environment where there can be movie releases there. You can do show launches. You can do different style of events where you want to play a live stream inside that virtual environment. One of another question that we've gotten a couple of different times here is just talking about sort of like, honestly, we've gotten this question 2 or 3 times, which is just around sort of what's the future of education, universities? Like if you think about education as an event, where people gather together in common spaces to learn, to get more information. How do we, and maybe I would sort of add on to that question because that is specific to that use case, but thinking more long-term, like how does this shift our thinking in terms of how we're approaching virtual and using virtual long-term? Amy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that one of the beauties of a platform like Spaces, for example, is when you have a virtual environment where you can place your objects and your 2D content. Unlike, I think of how in school you would go in and you would pin things up on the wall and you would have your objects. Yeah. Those things had an ephemeral nature to them where you would do this, the class would end, all of that would be gone, and you would never be able to see it again. Now, not only can those originally begin in virtual spaces, but then they can persist through time and serve as a reference point. So I think there's a really great moment for both these async and sync kind of collaboration efforts to happen. And I'm really looking forward to what we see.
Yeah. Vinay, what about you? How do you see education moving forward?
Yeah, we actually see education and the very nature of education, which is how do we learn, to really be one of the hallmarks of VR. In fact, we've been using VR with a lot of educational institutions for quite some time, and in particular, especially in medical students, learning about the human anatomy, the impact of different diseases, and also the solutions around some of these chronic diseases. When you see that visually, you understand that very viscerally, and that stays with you. Those concepts stay with you. And so what we've seen is when students learn very complex concepts in virtual reality, you use more of your brain, right? And so you learn that deeper and you learn that longer. And so you're essentially, in many ways, if you think about the different modalities of learning, by doing that in VR, that same coursework, the same curriculum, everyone can learn it in the way they learn best. And so there's a lot of power to that because some people learn very well in lectures. In China, we've done a lot of virtual education where many universities have been equipped with VR services. The great thing about that too is there's also scale. There are some programs that are just inherently better than others, but access to those programs can be very limited. So now with virtual reality, you can have a classroom of 500 people, all with the best view in the house. You can also pause lectures, you can look things up. In addition to the software aspect of VR, there are things, products and technologies that, for example, with the Vive Pro Eye, that does eye tracking. And with eye tracking, you can also gauge the level of intent, interest, and how much you're paying attention. So you can tell if someone is not understanding that information. And if you add the right algorithms to that, then you can also use that as an aid. So if you're discussing topics that the student may not understand, there are a variety of things that you can do to either enhance or pause or go back. So that way you're maximizing the learning opportunity. Yeah. And of course, back down to the educators. Oftentimes when we think about virtual solutions, we think we're replacing the expert. Going back to both the educator and also in the movie release, the experts know how to tweak their content, how to tweak that experience. But now with VR, you're given that expert the data. So all of a sudden, the educator is way more important because they know how to navigate that space. They know how to tweak. They know how to engage and maximize that learning. And the same thing goes with all of these examples. You're allowing the expert to finally be the expert and not have the constraints of having to do class sizes or having to pull on these in-person engagements, travel, etc. You're allowed them to do what they do best, right, and engage with the end user.
Yeah, and you're spot on there, man. We could go for another hour just talking about that. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I totally agree with everything you're saying. Look, we're seeing in terms of creating immersive technology for training, we're seeing jumps by things like 60% higher levels of comprehension as it compares to lecture-based learning, and we're seeing people retain information a lot faster. And we're seeing complex, abstract information be understood like it was a simple math equation. And the reason for that is because we're delivering information spatially. And so there's a lot of power there. There's a lot of power in general across immersive technology. Again, I want to respect everyone's time. We're coming up on the hour here. We are going to do this again. We're going to bring a group of experts together so that we can answer questions. We have a ton of questions. We've had such good conversations so far. We haven't gotten to them. I've got, my phone is scrolling with questions coming in. How do you, we have a lot of questions about how we're actually doing this, how we're going from Zoom to Facebook and YouTube Live. We have, the future, a lot of questions around the future of events. We have questions specifically around Vive, like does Vive Sync require avatars? We have Microsoft is what's happening with mixed reality right now, and when are we going to be able to integrate our own apps in development? What are the security implications of all of this? How do we produce virtual events for live performers and attendees that are also live usually? There's a bunch of questions that people have, and so clearly this is really meaningful. So I appreciate our featured guests, Joanna, Ron, Vinay, Amy. Thank you very much for joining us. Just for our listeners and viewers out there, again, just a couple of quick things. I want to say thank you first and foremost to Robert and Josh from Resource Department for being the first ones to believe in us when we said we wanted to bring this conversation live. And then to the VR/AR Association, to my friends and colleagues there for the support. And then honestly, my team at Brightline Interactive, we have been working over the last 5 days to pull together the information, the people, the resources, the technology to be able to bring this live really quickly. And we're going to do that and keep doing that because this is really, really meaningful stuff that we're talking about here specifically. And it has a lot of really incredible long-term implications. So if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about or that you've heard about, please feel free to reach out to us. Please just reach out to Donnie. It's really simple. Donnie at brightlineinteractive.com. Donnie at brightlineinteractive.com. We can answer more questions. And again, we're going to capture all these down, answer these questions, and then push them back out to all of you. So thank you very much for for watching Pivot Fast, Building Immersive Platforms for Virtual Events, Part 1, Part 2, coming soon.